Simmeth, who else is joining us for the first time, and to Wilma. It's good to see you guys in the house for the first time in a while. It's good to see your faces. This morning we continue on the theme of rest, but rest in the purpose and promise of God. Rest in the purpose and the promises of God. Our main text is taken from Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 to 16. Genesis 28, 10 to 16. Rest in the purpose and the promise of God. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went towards Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there, because the sun had set, and he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head, and lay down in that place. He had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and behold, the angel of God was ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and says, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Surely the Lord was in this place, and I did not know it. I'm just going to do a little bit of a backtrack to get us to where we are in our text. In Genesis, and this is, some of it is recurring because you heard it last week profoundly, some of this text. So, repetition is the mother of all learning. So Genesis 25, verse 23, but the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is so, why then am I this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people will be separated from your body. And 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. This was God's promise to Rebekah when she found out that she was pregnant. Now in Genesis chapter 27, verse 5 to 9, this is what Rebekah heard. But Rebekah overheard what Isaac had said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, listen, I overheard your father say to Esau, bring me some wild game and prepare for me a delicious meal, then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die. Now my son, listen to me and do exactly as I tell you. Now I'm setting up the text to go where the topic is. What Jacob and Rachel possibly or probably failed to know was that God's promise will always prevail. If you remember, God promised her that the younger will be the one that is stronger. He obviously wasn't talking in a physical sense, because Jacob was like a mama boy. Jacob was the soft boy who was home cooking. Esau was a strong guy who was out in the field hunting. Esau was the firstborn. And according to the culture, the older is always the one taking the next position of the father, not the younger. It was always the older. So I'm not sure if, I'm taking liberties with the text, but I'm not sure if Rebekah told Jacob what God said. Because remember, God said it to her. There's nowhere in the text that it says God said it to Jacob. God said to Rebekah, your son, the younger one, is the one that is going to be basically the one I'm choosing. Now, to Dad, culturally, let's go back culturally, possibly that didn't make sense to Jacob, because that's not the way it is done. It's the older son. And so Rebekah, hearing what God says, now is listening in and hearing Esau getting ready, hearing Isaac getting ready to bless Esau instead of Jacob. See, Brother Williams hinted at this last week that Jacob had some help with his deception. And possibly out of fear that what God promised Jacob was going to be robbed because Papa didn't listen. I was going to say something, but I leave it alone. Because Papa didn't listen to what God says to Mama. See, ladies, we're not the only one who's having problems. I'm naughty. But he wouldn't listen, so he was going to bless Esau. So Rebekah was going to help God out. And in helping God out is to deceive Isaac, who couldn't see at this point, to make sure that the blessing went to Jacob. But in their deception, things didn't go the way they presumed. Isn't that how it always is? We set out to do things and it never goes the way that they presume. So this is the events leading up to our text in chapter 28. Verse 10 says, after Esau threatened that as soon as my parents is dead, Jacob, you're a dead man because you stole what belongs to me. So we heard that last week. He took off, he ran away with his mother and father's instruction to go to Haran. So he departed from Beersheba and he went towards Haran. Haran being a crossroads. He was now at a crossroad. He came to a certain place and he spent the night there because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones and placed it under his head and lay down in that place. Now, he did steal the blessing, but he's still a lonely fugitive. He's a fugitive in his present state. And he's running away. He doesn't know how long he'll be a fugitive on the run. I wonder what his thoughts during those moments must have been. He possibly was beating himself up, because his action was what brought him into exile and brought this hardship upon him. He had his father's forgiveness, but I wonder if he feared that he may have caused God to forsake him and to not be with him. And I say that because of what he said in verse 16. Surely the Lord was in this place, and I did not know it. The promised seed, the seed of purpose, now a fugitive, running away from the promised land, feeling rejected and forsaken by his action. He didn't get to a place populated, he was in a solitary place. Oftentimes, God will bring us to a solitary place so that we can begin to reflect. Sometimes we think loneliness and where we are is abandonment, but the loneliness and the place of solitude was not an abandonment, it was a time for reflection. It was was a time that God wanted to bring us to a place where it wasn't Jacob under mama. It was Jacob having to rely on God and God alone. To dispel his fear and turmoil, God brought him this awesome vision. In the vision, he saw a ladder from where he was up to heaven. It says, angel of God was ascending and descending upon the ladder. Verse 12, he had a dream, behold, the ladder was set on the earth, and its top reaches to the heaven, and behold, the angel of God were ascending and descending upon the ladder. God was teaching Jacob something profound in this vision. The fullness of God is in Jesus Christ, our Lord. Nothing could be more significant than the symbols of the manifestation of Jesus Christ in the grand connection between heaven and earth, and between God and man. By him, God come down to man, and through him, man can ascend to God. That's what Jacob was seeing. The true mediator, Jesus Christ, our Lord. It was also teaching him something. Man will, my grandma said it this way, man plan and God wipes out. Man have their plan and their action, but only the plan of God will prevail. That's what Proverbs says. And so regardless of what Rachel and Jacob did, or regardless of what Isaac was about to do, nothing could thaw God's plan. And that's where we have to come to. Sometimes we're fighting the battle for ourselves, and we're trying to position ourselves, and we're trying to jolly for position, but we must understand that what God has for us is for us. I remember in my naive days, I usually say this, not understand the full extent of what I was saying, but I always say, what God has for me, no one can take from me. What God has for you is for you. And what was for Jacob, Rachel and Jacob didn't have to manipulate to try and get it, because in spite of what Esau was going to do, God's plan is greater than what any man does. And this is part of what the ladder was showing. Jesus said this speech to Nathanael. After you see heaven open and the angel of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Basically the same word as we see, he reiterates the same word as he was speaking to Nathanael. That same word we saw in Genesis 28, Jesus is saying in John 1:51. Secondly, in his speech in John 4, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. God is trying to teach Jacob that his blessing over him is greater than any blessing that Isaac could declare. So whether he get the blessing from Isaac or not, he could not miss the purpose and the plan that God has for his life. This vision was given to him to bring him comfort, encouragement, and confidence to a lonely fugitive, speaking into both his present circumstances and to his future purpose. When God says, I am the God of your father, Abraham and Isaac, he's basically saying, I am God over them. I am God over the affairs of man. I am God. They are under my command. All the activities, as I was studying this, I think of everything that is happening in the world. And where man think they're under control, they're in control. Or sometimes in our loneliness or in our hardship, we think that God has ceased to work. God is showing Jacob that in spite of what is going on with him, God is still actively doing his plan in the earth. God is still moving, and God is still working all things together for good. Behold, the Lord stood above, not beside, but above. I am God above your father. I am God above the natural. I am God above your natural bloodline. I am God, and what I put in place is greater than what any man can say. So if I miss a man's blessing, it's okay. The blessing that I need is from God. And once I have God's blessing, I have it all. The Lord, the self-existing one, the eternal, the supreme God, who transcends the destiny and the natural seed of Abraham, is interested in Jacob. Naturally, you and I wouldn't pick Jacob. Jacob is not the manly man. From the description of scripture, you ever see these magazines with these stuff? Man, that was Esau. Kind of remind me of when Samuel goes before David's children and he saw the first one, Eliab, and he goes, that's the man, that's a manly man. That must be the man that God chose. And God says, look not on the outward appearance, look at the heart. See, God chose Jacob not because of who Jacob is, but because of the purpose that God had on Jacob's life. He didn't pick Jacob because of how Jacob looked, and he didn't pick Jacob because of Jacob's present character, because God knows that he chose Jacob to bring him into his likeness and his image. I heard somebody say this: the way we've taught Christ and his blessing is that God chose us to make us happy. But God didn't chose us to make us happy. God chose us to reshape character. The blessings of God, and we saw that when William spoke on that last week. The blessings of God, when Jacob says, bless me. If it was a physical blessing, a matter of fact, let me put it this way. When Jacob says, I won't let you go until you bless me, Jacob was already physically a very blessed man. The Bible said he had so much that he was trying to bribe his brother with the possession that he already had. So what was the blessing that God gave to Jacob? Because we have to understand, and again we heard this last week, names weren't just something we pick out a hat and throw at a child. Name meant something. A matter of fact, when Rachel was giving birth to Benjamin, and it was a terrible labor and she was going to die, she named him, I'm trying to remember what she named, Beniel, which means son of my trouble or something to that extent. And it was Jacob that changed the, Joseph that changed the name, not Joseph, Jacob, yeah, that changed the name because the name meant that this boy had to walk around. You see, when you go through something and you understand what it means, you're not going to let your children go through the same thing. Because he had to go through life with a name that means he's a trickster and a liar. And now his wife is calling his child a name that he's going to go through, son of my trouble. And he said, no. He changed the name to Benjamin. Name means your identity, your character. Yes. In this encounter, God blessing is to change us into his image. We sing this song, change me, Lord, remake me, Lord, transform me to the image of your Son. That's the blessing that he's calling us to. And oftentimes, we are taught that blessing comes through things. The blessing that God has called us to is to make us anew. a new man, a new character. Jacob, at the time, you would say he was marred by his scheming. God knew that. God knew that when he chose him. He was a liar, and he was a schemer. God showed up and talked to liars and schemers. Yes, because God is the only one who can transform the liar and the schemer. God showed up right where he was. The ladder from earth to heaven. God also renewed a covenant of assurance and personal protection. He says, behold, the angels stood there, ascending and descending. They're ordering, directing, overruling all things in providence for the glory and the name of God. The latter signified Christ and the Father above, still working in the affairs of men. Christ the mediator. He's the one mediating between heaven and earth. We talked about a while back the lamb slain from before the foundation of the earth. He's always there in the beginning. Let there be light. Christ was. John 1 verse 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Christ was active from the beginning. One of the threads that I saw through this, when God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, which means God is continuing his work. What he's saying to Jacob, what I start with Abraham, what I did with Isaac, I'm going to do with you. And the one that is doing the doing through them is Christ Jesus our Lord. The promises of God didn't change in the New Testament. I know we want to do a division of the text, and the old is over here and the new is over here, but the old continue right through. The thread continue all the way through, because it's the same mediator working between you and working within me. Elohim, the one true God, who started a covenant with Abraham. And he didn't start the covenant with Abraham because of what Abraham did. That's why I love this song. It is grace that has brought us safe thus far. Abraham was from Chaldean. They were a pagan nation. And God snatched one man out of the pagan nation and said, I am going to make you a messenger and a blessing. And that blessing is, I'm going to change your character. I'm going to change who you are. And I'm going to equip you to bring the message of salvation to others. And God did the same with Isaac. And God, he said to Jacob, I will continue my mission. I will continue my purpose. I will continue my plan, regardless of their condition. He said to him, the place where you lie, I will give this seed to you and to your descendants. Now, something that struck me was God was going to give him the land to him. The land that he lied, the Bible says, I will give it to your descendants, who will be like the dust of the earth. Which means God is saying to him, you will live to have descendants. What you're going into may be hard, but you'll live. It won't destroy you. God never said to him, I'm going to make you not go. I'm going to fix Esau. Because we want everything. We have, and I put myself in there, my thing with God is I want to escape. I want you to do it now. Fix it now. Go into Esau's heart and turn Esau's heart around. Fix home so I can go back. And God is saying it's not about your comfort or what you want. It's about my purpose being fulfilled through you. And you need to go through this for me to shape your character. I saw that and I thought, oh Lord. Because when we get into a hard place, we want the instant fix. Let's be honest. Do it now. Get me out go through this. Let me find a gate, find a hole, but I want out now. God never offered him this. He says, I'm going to give this to your descendants, and wherever you go, I'm going to go with you. But he didn't send him and fix everything right away. He had to continue on the journey. He had to go and face himself. I'll get back to that in a moment. But as I was reading for my devotion last night, Acts chapter 16, where Paul and Silas was beaten because they delivered this slave girl that was following him for days, bugging them, and Paul had had enough and rebuked the demon. The demon came out, and she was a money maker. You don't touch a man's money. You touch a nation's money, you get into trouble. And it's not that they care about the girl. He touched their resource. And so they built a coup against him, and Paul and Silas was beaten up, thrown in prison. And what I don't understand about the text, prison is prison, but it says they were in the inner prison. So it's like to put them deeper in prison than you could go. They were heavily chained, and they were in there worshiping and praying. Mind you, some of us would not see it that way. We'd probably take the route of Elijah that says, Lord, I'm depressed because after doing such great works, here I am. God, I've been serving you. Look at all the miracles you've done. You mean you couldn't save us from the crowd? They went into prison, and they were chained, and as they were there singing, the Bible says, and as they were there worshiping, a earthquake happened. And their chains fell off. Not only theirs, but all the prisoners' chains fell off. And the prison guard thought, there's no way this happened and all the prisoners stay put. So he was going to kill himself. And Paul says, hold on, paraphrasing the text, but hold on, we're all here. And something strikes me about that, because see, if I'm in a prison and the chains fall off, and it doesn't matter how dark it is, I'm going to start crawling around trying to find my way. Because nobody wants to be, let's be honest here, nobody wants to be in prison. And I'm trying to get us to see the escape mentality that we live in. That I'm not worried about no jailer or nobody else. I'm crawling out. Is there a little light that I see? I'm going to crawl my way, because it said it was so dark that when Paul says, no, don't kill yourself, we're all here. Because for him, if he let all his prisoners escape, I guess Rome would take him out. So he turned on the light to see if what Paul was saying was true. And they were all there. And he had an opportunity to minister to them. There was a purpose why he was in prison. But some of the time we're so anxious to come out of where we are that we don't realize and we don't fulfill the purpose as to why we were brought to where we are. Because we start to think about it in the sense of me, and not realizing that if God is truly in control of our lives and He's with us wherever we are, then it means whatever situation we're in, God is with us. And there's a purpose why we're there. The blessings that he reiterated was in Genesis 12:2, 2-3, Genesis 22-18, and Genesis 26-4. This is the third time now God is saying, behold, I will give you and your descendants, and I will be with you. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. I will keep you wherever you go. Whatever circumstances you're in. He didn't say I will take you out of it, but I will keep you in it. You won't lose your mind going through it. You won't lose your way going through it. And not only will I keep you, I will bring you back to the place and to the promise that I have given you. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Rest in the promises of God. Because if God has a promise over your life, he will not leave until it is fulfilled. He promised Jacob to personally be with him, to protect him, and to bring him back in safety. But it doesn't mean that he wasn't going to go through hardship. It doesn't mean that life is going to run smooth as butter. Because God promised him that he will go with him. God promised him that he will keep him. God promised him that he will bring him back, but he still had to face Laban. He still had to go to Haran, to Jacob's, Rebecca's, homeland, and he had to face his uncle. Brother William said this last week, and you don't know if it's a genetic thing, because Laban was just as crooked. As I studied through this, I don't think it's only just a genetic thing, it's a human thing. It's a human thing. And as much as we want to look at Jacob scheming, and it's just Jacob who schemed, we are schemers and manipulators in our own rights. Okay, don't stone me. But we scheme and we manipulate. Oftentimes we do that even in our prayers. We try to scheme to get God to do what we want him to do. And to get us out of where we think we should get out of, at the speed we think we should get out of it. And so we manipulate and we scheme. It's a human condition. I know you're all too holy for that. The thing that awes me about the grace of God is he knows the human condition. And he picks us in spite of our human condition because he knows the power of his love can transform us into his likeness, his image, and change us to become the people that he purposed for us to be. That's the wonderful thing about God. While Jacob probably was lying there beating himself up, God was getting ready to reveal himself to him. While he thought he was forsaken, and the promise and the blessings of God is gone because of the mistakes that we make. Because that's one of the things that the enemy tried to use, is the mistakes that you make, or the mistake that your mama make, or possibly where you come from. Didn't they play that game with Jesus? You can't be the Messiah. You can't be the Son of God, because isn't that your father, the carpenter? Isn't he from Nazareth, the lowest? Who come from Nazareth? No good thing come out of Nazareth. You're from a third world country. What do you know? You can't step into the first world blessings. Here he is, he's journeying to an unknown country, maybe a country known to his mama, but it's not known to him. And I can say that for some of us here, that were born in Canada, but your parents live in Jamaica, they know the country, you don't. So if you have to go back there to go live for a season, you're going to feel like Jacob. It's unknown to you. It might be known to my mama, but in which I'm going to. The unknown is a scary place. The unknown is fearful. But God was going to bring him there to truly get in touch with the things that is within him. One of the things that I have learned is a person will never change until they admit or accept the things that are with them or in them. It doesn't matter how much anybody tell you, until you admit, I'm a trickster, I'm a manipulator, you will never be ready for change. And I'll show that to you a little bit. But here he is heading to face Laban. And Laban was his mirror. God ever put you in front of somebody that irritates the life out of you? Or make your life miserable? And sometimes we focus on the mirror and not the reflection that is coming back at us. Because it's easy to see what somebody else is than to truly see what it is God wants to deal with within us. And I know it's hard, but it's the fact. Because there are times when you find a situation and somebody is complaining, let's say, for instance, there's Mark and Sister Annette and Sister Monica, and Mark encounters Sister Annette, and Mark says, Sister Annette is a problem. Every time I have to work with Sister Annette, you know she's a problem. And so we shift Sister Annette out of the way and we bring Sister Monica to work with Mark, and Mark go home. You know, that Sister Monica is just like Sister Annette. Both of them, I don't know what cloth they're cut out of, but they're the same thing. They give me the same problem. And so we move the girls out of the way and we bring in Brother Chris to work with Mark, and he go, oh my gosh. This boy acts like a girl because he just acting just like Sister Monica and Sister Annette, and he's such a problem. And what's the one constant in the circle? Mark. Who is the one constant? Yes, Mark. Who is the one constant in that? It's Mark. But it's easy for Mark to see everybody else, because if you look at yourself, then you must surrender to change. And change is never easy. So it is easier to look at everybody else than to face the mirror that is before you. I've said this to somebody before, and I lost a friend. I wasn't sorry that I said it, but I'm sorry that I lost a friend. But she was complaining about someone and what they were doing and what they were saying. And I have the audacity to say to her, is it possible that God gave you a mirror? And they got righteously indignant and decided, how dare me equate them to that person. It's easy to see the fault in somebody else externally than to see. And that's why the Bible says, pick the beam out of your own eyes before you pick it out of someone else's. He had to face Laban. And even though sometimes we're tough learners, aren't we? Even though sometimes God put it right before our face for us to see and to learn and to change, it was still Laban's fault. All the way through with Jacob, Laban tricked him. First day he arrived and he met the beautiful Rachel. Ooh la la. bag of chips and some Coke. And he said, this one, and Laban go, okay, you love Rachel, you're going to work for 7 years, I need 14 out of you. So instead of come up front and say, I need 14 years out of you, he got him really nice and drunk and slipped Leah in, poor Leah. That's a whole different sermon, but poor Leah. Sacrificial lamb. Thrown in. And Jake, can you imagine waking up on your wedding night and somebody look at you and go, what you doing here? I didn't want you. I mean, think of especially girls here, really. But that's what the poor girl woke up to. The Bible says her eyes were funny looking. Was not Jacob's choice. And Laban started out with a trick, and he still didn't see that he ran into himself. It goes on to the animals later on, where they would try to outsmart and out-trick each other. Till the very day that he left, he depended on himself and his scheming ways. When he came to meet Esau, he still go back to his manipulating, I want to control the situation, scheming ways. And he still didn't learn the lesson. Are we glad God's mercy endures? Oh my gosh, not because of you and I, but that the mercy and grace of God endures. He went back to his scheming, manipulating ways. I'm doing this to gain this. Even after the promise was given to him, even after he was told, I will be with you, I will keep you, and I will bring you back, he was still trying to control and manipulate his life. Still trying to work it, even up until Esau. Until, in chapter 30, he went away by himself. By ourselves, loneliness is never a bad thing. I know the enemy used this lonely by ourselves feeling, because you know you can be with many people and still feel alone. Amen. You can be in a room full of people and still feel alone. Oftentimes in those times God wants your attention and my attention, because there's something within our lives that he wants to deal with. He pulled Jacob aside because he wanted to deal with something in his life. That's why when he woke up, he said, surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it. At my lowest, God was with me, and I didn't know that God was with me. At my lowest, it's not for you and I to try and figure our way out and to crawl out. It's for us to step back and trust God to navigate our lives and ask God to direct our lives instead of trying to fix it ourselves. Can God be in a place where it seems as if I've done the worst that I could ever do? God have a way of showing up at those moments. It was at Paul's worst that God showed up. Not only was he a part of Stephen's stoning, but he was now empowered after that he seek to go and destroy the rest of the body. And it was at that moment, his worst thoughts, his worst plan, that God showed up. There is no man that is greater than the plan of God. There is no demonic action that is greater than the plan of God. Nothing can tar and hinder the plan of God from coming to fruition. Don't give the devil any more power than he needs. Because the devil is not over God. God is over him. He's a created being. Don't give your weakness more power over God. Because if it means that he's got to snap you down to really change you, he can bring you down to bring you up. There are times when we're praying, and this is to parents before I go to the next text. There are times when we're praying for God to take our kids out of the low, when God wants to use that low to transform them where they are into where he wants to be. Because sometimes it is our very low that we come to really face who we are and what is within us. That's when we look in the mirror and really see who we are. That's why God asked Jacob this question. I like how God operates. Like he didn't know his name. In the wrestle, he said to him, "What is your name?" What do you think God was trying to get him to do? For once and for all, face himself. Face the weakness. Face the character default. Truly face who and what you are. Years ago when I started out, sorry, this also made a lot of people upset, but I remember doing a message, and in the midst of the message, the Lord said to my heart, each of you are a potential prostitute. I know. Each of you is a potential thief. Each of you is a potential murderer. Each of you. Because in the nature that you are, the heart of a man outside of God is desperately wicked. And if we recognize that, what we require from man, we will not. We will only require it from God. A lot of time when man trip us up, we give them too much. Because the character of a man, including myself, this flesh, this falling nature, is potentially and is in itself wicked. And I challenge any sanctified here, because when somebody step on your toe, your first response is not to say, "Oh, I bless you." Especially if they step really hard. I know sometimes we read what Paul was like, what this one was like, and we put them in a neat little box and we put it aside. But it's a human condition. That's why Jesus come to redefine it, because he said, listen, it says in the Old Testament, "Thou shalt not kill." But when you have hatred in your heart against your brother, you are a murderer. Potentially, don't give. I know the thing about us is that we want to give ourselves some lift of how good and how great and how outstanding we are. But there is no lift within us except Christ in us. Yes, come on. Because without Christ in us, we are Jacob. We are Paul on a mission to murder. And many times we who sit here and say, "Lord, Lord," we murder each other with our mouth. So there is no laudation that goes to man. That's why Paul within himself says, if I boast about anything in the purpose that God has called me to, if I should boast about this gift, if I should boast about this calling, if I should boast about this position, it goes to God and God alone. Because even after God forgave Paul so much, when John Mark crossed him, he says, I don't want to work with him. Oh, God help us. It caused a rift between him and Barnabas because he didn't want John Mark. Potentially, it's not about you, and it's not about me. This attitude of hierarchy and positional glory is a lie from the pit of hell. Anything that glorifies man is a lie from the pit of hell. The Bible didn't set up itself to glorify any man. When it talks about David, it shows you his condition. When it talks about every single Moses, it shows you his weakness. What is he trying to say? No man within themselves measures up. Because even Moses needs Christ. Has nothing to do with you and with me. That's why I can't look down on anybody else. Because I need the same pickup they do. None of us have arrived anywhere. I know oftentimes when we talk about the patriarchs, we put them in a place as if it was on their bloodline or on who they were. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do with the power of God that chose and transformed them. There is no worshiping of man. The worship is of God and God alone. And that's why God presented that vision to Jacob. It has nothing to do with you. Even in your mess, I am still God. Even in your mess, I am still God. In your failure, I am still God. In chaos, I am still God. And when we use this phrase, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world, that's what we're using it in saying. In spite of everything, God is still God. In the condition that Jacob was in, it made him no different than any other man. He needed salvation. A man of purpose still needed salvation and still needed his character to be changed. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9 to 10 says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Nathan, I need no help this morning. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness. I always smile when I read this text because we don't boast of our weakness. Why did he boast of his weakness? So that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, that I am content. Do you have that up there, Brother Terry? Yes, 2 Corinthians. For the power of Christ, for the sake of Christ, that I am content in weakness, in insults, in hardship, in persecution, and calamity. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Can I ask you a question? Let's be honest this morning, so that we're not just hearers of the word, but that God would truly do a work in our heart. Do we boast more gladly of our weakness? Are we at rest for the sake of Christ and come to contentment in weakness? Are we contented in hardship? Are we contented in persecution? Inside reflection. This is between you and God right now, this moment. Am I content in calamity? Then ask yourself the question, why not? Just for a moment. Why am I not content? Oftentimes, I'm not content in my weakness because I care what people think. I care more what people think than allowing my weakness to glorify God. Well, I can't share that I went through that. What will Brother Williams think? Won't respect me anymore. I won't have my holy glow anymore. I lose my halo. You know how many of you have a powerful testimony in your weakness to deliver somebody else, but because I'm too concerned about my image, oh God, I'm too concerned about my image, which I wasn't called to glorify or to promote. I sit on my testimony to protect my image instead of glorifying the image of God. See, I have this attitude. It's a human condition. I remember reading Rahab, and I always get mad because I wondered why the text have to say the prophet Rahab, the prostitute. Why in heavens? It said it in Genesis. Why when I get to Matthew, I have to say that again? Why? Because I have the same mentality. I protect my image. But God says it's in my weakness. It's in your weakness that the power of God is on display. You know why? Because it was in God's weakness, in Jacob's weakness, we see God show up in a powerful way to speak into his life. It's in our weakness. I've heard testimony of how God made people on the mountaintop and in worship and in wonderful awe of his glory. And I'm not saying that he didn't do that, but it was at my weakness that I encountered God in depression. It was at my lowest that I heard God for myself. You know, people tell you about God and go up hearing about God, but it was in depression. I remember my spiritual mom was so worried about me. I don't think she's ever seen me in the state that she caught me in. That she tricked me to come to her house. Yeah, she pulled a Jacob on me. To come to her house just to watch over me because she was so worried. She was so concerned. But she couldn't do anything. But God met me in that little place. But we don't boast in our weakness because we're too clean. So that the power of Christ may rest upon me for the sake of Christ. I'm not sharing because it's about me. I'm sharing to glorify God. It's for the sake of Christ. Why I'm contented to say, yes, I'm not perfect. Got some issues. God is still working on me. In insult, in hardship, in persecution, in calamity, I can rest. Why? Because I know the promise and purpose of God must come to pass. Because God says, even in my weakness, he's a strong God. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do that with God, that I have a plan for your life and for my life. Proverbs 19:21 says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Do you hear that, church? Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. I know many of you could testify to that. I started out, I had a plan. My mama had one and I had one. My mama wanted nursing, I want lawyer. But God had another plan. As my grandma used to say, man, God used an eraser. And our plan isn't always his plan. It is the purpose of God. And some of us take detours. Many detours. But the amazing thing about that is God knows every detour before you detour. And he has a way of incorporating it into his plan. And many of our detours, like Jacob, cause hardship and pain. I'll bluntly say this, a lot of what we're going through sometimes has nothing to do with the devil. And has nothing to do with God not being with you. Many of what we're going through is the stubbornness of our own will, wanting to control the narrative. We put ourselves, because we start to try to do what only God can do. See, the plan of the enemy is still in play. He wanted Eve and Adam to become God over their own lives. And he's still doing the same trick today. Is that you and I would still try to be God over our lives instead of submit to God for the plan that he has for you and for me. And that's why we don't rest. We don't rest because I still want the narrative to play out the way that I imagine it. I still want it to work out the way that I want it to happen. God gave Joseph favor, but he didn't tell him that favor was going to take him through a pit, through false accusation, through prison, to get him to position. When we trust God, that God has a plan for our lives and God is in control, it doesn't matter where we are, because no matter where we are, the promise of God is that he is with us. And if he is with us and allowing us to go through something, he's shaping us for a greater. This guy that started Alfred, I forgot his name, he says God wastes nothing. Nothing in our life is wasted. Because all of that shaped Joseph. He was a tattletale. You call it little whiny that sees everybody else and run and complain on them, until when his brothers stand before him, he was a mature man of character that didn't see what man did, but only saw purpose that God had. So he could look at the ones who betrayed him and throw him out and say, I have no heel against you. It wasn't about you, oh God. It wasn't about you. What you did to me wasn't about you. It was about God getting me into a place where he could shape me for the position that he's bringing me to. So I got no hill with you. I got no battle with you, because I understand if this is happening, God is allowing it to happen happen because of what he wants to do through me and where he was bringing me. See, I said this a couple weeks ago. Joseph didn't know what his hand was going to be. So in the pit, it was just a pit. When an accusation came at him, it was just that, falsely accused. When he ended up in prison, prison was prison. He didn't have a roadmap telling him what the end was going to be. He was in the same position as you and me. But when we go through these things, God is shaping us to fulfill a greater purpose in our lives. The text that I wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the Bible says that Paul had a thorn in the flesh. And no matter how much time he prays, 2 Corinthians 12, it wouldn't go away. And finally, this was God's answer to him. My grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in your weakness. Some say the thorn that he had to deal with is watching a film in his mind of Stephen dying, and he was part of it. That's what some say. Some of the studies that I've done say that's possibly one of the thorn, is watching him being a part of an innocent man dying. The Bible didn't say specifically what the thorn is, because I believe it's for all thorn. Whether it's mental, physical, emotional, whatever it may be, my grace is sufficient. If he's not taking us out, he's shaping us in. If he's not taking us out, he's shaping us in. Oftentimes, we want to come out before the oven timer goes off. And if we come out, if you put a bread in and you take it out before it's time, it will look good on the outside until you break the inside, and all you get is that stretchy dough because it wasn't complete. What did he say? He wanted to make perfect. He wanted to perfect. And so he keeps us in as he allowed Jacob to go through for his purpose. And I'll close with this text. Exodus chapter 9, verse 16. But for this purpose, I have raised you up, to show you my power, so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. For this purpose, I have raised you up, not for your comfort, not for what you perceive, not for what you think, but for this purpose, I have raised you up, so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. We have made the gospel so much about a person in the sense of a man, one nation. We've made the gospel so much about things and personal accomplishment that it's lost its power and its true effect. The purpose in Exodus chapter 9, Moses is reminding the children of Israel why God raised them up. So starting from there to today, God raised us up to show forth his power, not your power, not my power, his power, so that his name may be proclaimed throughout all the earth. There are times we want to be reasoned out because we want our name to be famous. And if that's the purpose, why we want to do within the gifting that God has given us to do, we have missed the reason, and we have missed the power. And we become a people with form and no godliness. Because it's about me, my ministry, my possession. That's one of the things that grits my teeth when I hear my pulpit. It hurts it hurts my pulpit, my church, my position. Sister, you're sitting in my chair. We've become a people that have declared a possessional gospel. This is not a possessional gospel. It's nothing about me. We can't make the statement that Paul made by saying it's no longer I that live, but Christ that lives within me, and then take possession of what belongs to God. We're suffering because we're touching the glory of God. Because what belongs to God is God, and he says, I will share my glory with no man. And the church has become a possessional thing. This hierarchical, possessional thing, and from the beginning of time, God has been dealing with hierarchy. He's been dealing with power structure. All the way through. When Joseph brought the 2 sons to Jacob and said, bless him. And God says, I chose the younger. Joseph goes as far as to try and grab his hand to put on the older son. Jacob, who encountered God and understand that God don't work in the ways of man, crossed his hand over. We've got to resist the hand of man that tries to pull us into the direction that man wants to go and cross over into the plan and the purpose of God, because it's not about the building of a man, it's about the glory of God. And when we put things back in its rightful place, we will begin to encounter the power of God. When we shift things back, oh, if sister so-and-so don't pray, prayer don't happen. The power structure becomes on a man. I thank God for the gift that he gives, but outside of the gift, I am nothing. There's a song that says, I'm a nobody, trying to tell everybody about somebody who saved my soul. There is too much of the power structure that still rests on man. I come to hear, I come to see. And if this one isn't in place, I can't listen to that one. And it becomes about the jostling power of man. In church, we got to come to a crossroad like Jacob, where our rest is either in what man says and in our ways, or is in the purpose and the promises of God. We sing the song, standing on the promises of Christ my King. Through eternal ages, let his praises ring. Glory in the highest, I will shout and sing. We're standing on the promises of God. If we're standing on the promises of God, we will find rest. Regardless of where we are, we will know rest. will know that he who began will complete it, regardless of what is happening. Let's truly stand on the promises of God. And like Job, be able to say, though he slay me, and I know this hurt a lot of people when God slay you. He's the one who made you. He can break you and put you back together. That's why David says, let the bones that he has broken now rejoice. Because sometimes, I don't know if you have a bone broke and it's not set properly, you know that the doctors, to get it to really heal properly, will have to break it again for your own healing. For your own healing, for you to be able to walk properly, they break it again so that they could set it properly, so that you would get back the proper gait. Job says, I understand. Let me put it in another way. Job says, I understand that if I'm going through this, God has allowed it. And so, though God allowed me to go through this hardship, yet will I trust him, because if he allowed me to go through it, he's got a purpose to use it. And if he's going to use it, he's going to glorify himself through it. So regardless of what you and I are going through, if God is allowing us to go through whatever it may be cancer, it may be sickness, it may be financial hardship, but if God is allowing us to go through this season, then God has a purpose for it. And if God has a purpose for it, God will glorify himself through it. It's for us to trust him and truly rest in what he says. I wonder if that's why Paul and Silas began singing. Because you know, sometimes if you don't start to worship, your mind will take you into places. I'll give you a key before we wrap up. And we'll sing that song, Standing on the Promise. Before we wrap up, I believe, and David's life is profoundly in that. Though he will talk about what he goes through, he will lament. He always go back to the greatness of God. He always goes back to praise. He'll always go back to worship. I really believe why Paul and Silas in prison began to worship and began to pray. It takes their mind off of what is happening around them, and it centered their mind on God. They began having God, worshiping God. A lot of times we let our mind run and even overrun us into areas. My grandma always say, cross bridge that we haven't even come to yet. Because not only are you worried about your present circumstances, we run into 10 years from now, tomorrow, 5 days from now. Because it's always what's going to happen next. But remember, God is present right here and now. He's your present help, present right now. Stay in the present with him. But oftentimes I allow my mind to create escape routes, because we are magicians. In our own mind, we're magicians. We start to create some Houdini-like situation of how we're going to get out of what we're in. Then we start, and then when it's not happening, and I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, when it's not happening the way that we create, we say God has failed us, but God didn't tell us to go create our escape. So he has nothing to do with it. It's us. And so sometimes when it gets hard, And brothers and sisters, it will get hard. Because he didn't promise us that he won't. He says, in this world you will have tribulation, but be of good courage. I have overcome. Look at the one that overcome. And stop trying to create ways to get out and deal with it. But look at the one who overcome. And remember, if he overcome, and he says, I overcome, then I just need to trust him that it's already done. It's already done. And I need to rest in the promises of God. Jesus said this, your worry and your presumption and your creative magician moments of escape will not change one thing. All it has to you is more sickness. All it has to you is more distress.